G'day and welcome back to MotoringBox. On today's episode we're going to be looking at my BA Falcon XR6 Turbo, giving it a clean, giving it a proper going over to get it looking as good as possible. Stay tuned. So as I mentioned, what we're doing today is giving this car a once over. This is what I like to do with every single used car I buy. Because while this car is in really good condition, as you would have seen perhaps in one of my previous videos, it is definitely something we can work on and improve, and it's really quite satisfying to bring the car back to as good a condition as it can be and seeing what sort of results we can get even though we're spending very little money in the process. Now it is actually a rainy day outside here today, but don't let that stop you from cleaning up your car and giving it a wax, because once you've done this to your vehicle, even when you do take it outside and it gets muddy and wet and dirty, having a properly waxed car will make it really easy to get it cleaned up and looking fantastic again. So before we can do anything, we have to give this car a proper wash. Let's get into it.
And for this I'm going to be using some MkII's next generation car wash. I've been using this stuff ever since I got my first car back in 2005, and I find it to be a really good product. Before you start washing the car, give the car a quick spray with the hose to dislodge any surface contaminants. It'll make the job of cleaning the car a little bit easier and hopefully dislodge anything which is sitting loosely on the top of the paint. Washing your car should be a lot like washing yourself in the shower. Always start at the top and then work your way down. Gravity pulls the soapy water downwards and you can really use this to your advantage, but it also means that you're reaching the dirtier areas of the car last. So it really helps your sponge remain clean until you get towards the end of the job. And I tend to stay away from the wheel arches and the wheels themselves until the very end, and you can even use a brush for these areas instead of the sponge. For hosing off all of the soap, I decided to get out my pressure washer. I usually tend to avoid this because I just can't be bothered. But in this instance, I think it's worthwhile because it'll really help dislodge any of the firmer contaminants which are still stuck on the paint. The pressure washer also makes really light work of cleaning up the wheels and also blasting mud and dirt out of the wheel arches.
Okay, so we've got the car nice and clean now. I haven't dried it off yet because we don't need to at this stage, because if you've seen any of my other previous cleaning videos before, you'll know what I like to do next. And that is to refill the soapy bucket of water and go over everything with a clay bar. This is actually a really easy process to do. You just need to soap up the panel and then start gliding the clay over the top of the paint in smooth backwards and forwards motions. What I'd like to do after going over the paint with the clay is to get my old corded drill. This one cost me about 50 bucks, I reckon 15 years ago. Try and say that about cordless gear that you might have. So what I do with this, I've got a buffing cone attached to it and I'll actually work in a wax. In this case, I've got a MkII's Wet Look wax, which I think does a really good job at protecting the paint and also upping the shine. Now, because I've filmed videos on this process twice before, I'm not going to get fully in depth this time around, but what I'll do is I'll grab some tape and we'll mask off a little square of the bonnet here. We'll go over it with the clay and then the wax, and we'll see just what sort of a difference we can achieve.
So what I'm doing is using some painter's tape to mark off a little square on the bonnet of my XR6 Turbo. Next I'm going to soap up the panel and start rubbing my clay bar over the top. You don't need to apply a firm amount of pressure here, just enough to glide the clay over the surface, and the clay bar will do all of the work in picking up the contaminants. And once you're happy with the smoothness of the panel, you can either wipe off the suds or hose it off with water. Next up, we're going to apply the wax. What I like to do is leave the buffing attachment stationary and start smearing the compound across the area. Otherwise, if you just hit it directly with the buffing attachment spinning, it'll spray all across your garage. Again, when you're buffing the wax in, you don't need to apply very much pressure. It's really the buffing attachment which is again doing all of the work. So run over every area of your panel a couple of times. With that process complete, I'm going to remove the tape to see if we can spot the difference. And then once you're happy, simply get a clean microfiber cloth and buff off the remaining residue. The clay barred and buffed section is here on the left, and whilst you can see a little dividing line between the two areas, there isn't a lot of difference here visually. But this next example will show you the difference in smoothness between the square area which I've just polished and the existing paint on the bonnet. So that's a really good indication on how smooth this square section of the bonnet now is. So now we have the fun job of going over the entire car, using the clay bar first and then applying the wax.
Okay, you now join me here on day 2 of this tidy up. I spent about 3 hours yesterday afternoon giving this thing a proper clay bar and buffing it with the wax as well, and I have to say it's looking absolutely phenomenal, even here in the garage under the lighting. You can see in the reflection my collection of used oil bottles which are sitting over there in the corner of the garage. And yeah, you know, I can't wait to see what this looks like when we get it out into the sun this afternoon. But in addition to polishing up the paint, there are a few other things you can do to your car to get it looking as good as possible. And when it comes to this car, the first thing I had to fix were the clear side indicators. I had the same problem with my AU Fairmont, and that is the original lenses were starting to yellow off. So I went on eBay and got a set of aftermarket replacement lenses. And even though the quality of these is probably not up there with the OEM lenses, I think for about 30 bucks for the pair is what it cost me. You can't go wrong with swapping them out. Another thing I had to do to this car is replace some of the center caps on the wheels. That's because on the passenger side, both of the wheel caps were missing entirely, and it really does bring down the overall look of the car. So what I did is I went on eBay and I found a set of 4 Ford replacement caps. These are proper OEM Ford products, so they really were top quality. These actually seem to fetch quite a lot of money these days. I was lucky enough to find a set of 4 brand new caps for I think it was around $50 or $60. But since then I haven't been able to find that listing ever again, and they're actually selling these individually for about 40 bucks a pop. So that is quite expensive. So perhaps I got lucky there, but keep an eye out because you might find them cheaper if you look around. So it was really good to get a hold of a set of 4 of these. I was able to replace the 2 on the passenger side, but I even found out that the cap on the rear driver's side wheel was glued on, and that's because all of the mounting tabs on that center cap had previously been snapped off, and someone just got some black kind of gooey glue, sludged some on there, and then slapped the cap back on permanently, I guess. And then the last thing I needed to look at was this thing. It's actually a factory accessory from Ford, and it goes down into the lower air dam of the front bumper. These were an accessory that you had to order with your car from the dealership. They probably were dealer fitted as well. And they were XR6 specific. You can see in the center here it has the XR6 logo, and there is actually meant to be a badge fitted to this. I have worked out that it's the same XR6 badge which is on the side skirts. But the reason that I've actually got this off the car is because when I bought this car, this grille was in horrendous condition. You know, half of the paint had already flaked off and it was looking really rusty. The badge itself was also shot, so I had to peel that off. I had to strip all the paint off using paint stripper and then a wire wheel on my drill. And then I've also resprayed it in a satin black. I actually used an old can of black engine enamel paint, which I've got sitting in the cupboard. And you know, it's turned out pretty good, and because it is an engine paint, which is hopefully designed to withstand high temperatures, hopefully it'll perform well on the front bumper of my car. The XR6 badge, which I need here, I actually do have it on order, but it hasn't turned up yet. But I think what I'm going to do is install this anyway, because I think it looks pretty good as it is. You know, back in the day before I owned this car, I would sometimes see XR6 turbos on the street, and I would notice this grille with the XR6 badge sitting down on the front of the car, and to me it kind of screamed aftermarket or something that someone had just slapped on there. You know, I don't really think these cars need an additional XR6 badge down on the front under the number plate. So I might install it onto the car as it is and see how it looks, because it looks quite subtle, I think, just in the black satin finish. And it is a little bit like the FPV front lower grills that you see on like the F6 Typhoon and things like that. These lower grills are not to everyone's liking, but they are comparatively rare. At least they are uncommon at the very least, so I am going to reinstall it and see what I think about it. And if I do keep this grille on the car, you know, I also have the option of reinstalling that badge when it turns up. Although at the moment, I'm probably just leaning towards leaving it as it is. So let's get it reinstalled onto the car and we'll see how it looks.
You'll notice that this lower grille piece has 3 tabs running across the top, and these line up with 3 holes which are drilled into the top surface of this lower air dam. Once the tabs are in place, the lower section of the grille is simply secured using a single screw. Ordinarily, to install this grille properly, you actually need to remove the under tray from the underside of the bumper. I've decided to cheat a little bit and try and install this screw using this little ratcheting screwdriver. It's definitely slow going, but it's going to be a lot faster in the long run compared to taking off the under tray. I really love how the lower grille matches the upper grille perfectly, and I think it sets off the front of the car nicely, so I'm really happy with how it's all looking. You can now turn your attention to the engine bay. Luckily, I have a full guide on how you can really easily detail and clean the engine bay of your car. So if you want to find out more, click the link in the video description.
Now, the last thing you can look at is your vehicle's interior. In my case, I'm not actually going to clean anything in here today because it was actually pretty clean when I bought it. All of the seats had seat covers fitted, and I reckon, judging by the condition of these seats, it's probably had seat covers almost its entire life. If you do need to clean your car's interior, I'll leave a link to a video which I've filmed previously showing a really cheap method of shampooing your fabric seats, carpets and things like that, using a really cheap wet dry vacuum cleaner. So do make sure you check out that video if you do need to get a little bit more serious with cleaning out your car's interior. But you know what, I reckon this one's done, so let's get it out into the sun and we'll check it out. Well, would you get a load of this? You know, I think it's turned out amazing considering this car is a 2004 model. It's 16 years old this year. But I have to say, this is probably the best detailing outcome I've ever had on any of my cars. So it just goes to show that if the underlying paint condition is still really good, you can get some fantastic results just by giving it a clay bar and then giving it a good buff with some quality wax. Now that the sun is coming out, you know, some of the reflections that are coming off this car are absolutely insane. It's almost like a mirror, and this beautiful mercury silver metallic is absolutely popping. I am just thrilled with how this car has come out. It looks like a brand new paint job, even though this car does have a few stone chips and minor imperfections around the place. If you stand a meter or two away, it looks like brand new, so I am thrilled with the results. And you know, anyone can do this with very little financial outlay. All you need is some car washing solution. I use MkII's, a couple of cloths, a sponge, some clay for claying the paint, and then a decent wax. You can even apply the wax by hand if you like, but as you saw, I like to use the drill with a buffing attachment. I just think it's a hell of a lot easier, less time, less effort, and I mean, look at the result. Now, whenever I publish a detailing video like this one, inevitably there's going to be professional detailers down in the comments section telling me all the things that I did wrong. You know, you shouldn't have used a microfiber cloth like that to wipe down the paint, and your clay bar technique is diabolical. You know, you're gonna scratch the shit out of your paint. But you know, have a look at what I've been able to achieve here. You know, my knowledge is probably less than 1% of what those professional detailing guys know, but they make a living out of detailing cars to within an inch of their lives, show cars, you know, getting a spotless showroom finish. But you know, I don't really care. I just want my daily driven car to look stunning from 1 or 2 meters away. And you know, I have definitely achieved that. And you can do it too using the basic parts and tools that I used in the video you've just watched. And that's it, we've reached the end. If you found this video to be helpful or entertaining in any way, do consider throwing me a like, subscribing to MotoringBox, or checking out some of the other videos I've got on the channel. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.